Chapter 1: The Hymn That Should Not Be Sung. The first time I heard it, the church bell cracked in half. I was 8 years old, sitting in the last pew of St. Clement's Chapel, when the sound began from the choir, not from the organ, but from somewhere beneath the floor. At first, it was a faint hum, like wind trapped inside stone. Then it swelled, each note dragging up something heavy, solemn, and ancient. The bell in the tower rang once, twice, then split with a sharp, brittle crack, as if the tower itself had flinched. Panic rippled through the congregation. Mothers pulled their children close. Men crossed themselves, but I Saturday frowning, listening. The hymn was in Latin, yet it carried the gravity of a prayer. The words crawled through my mind like smoke, ancient and unknowable, but somehow familiar. My lips moved unconsciously, shaping sounds I didn't understand, and yet could already repeat. After the service, Father Merrick found me lingering by the altar. His hands shook as he gripped my shoulders. "If you ever hear that again," he whispered, breath trembling, "you must run. Do you understand?" I nodded. I lied. That night, I dreamed of a book bound in gray skin, its pages sewn with blackened thread. When I opened the first page, the hymn spilled out each word like a nail driven into the dark. I woke with the first verse burning in my throat. I sang it softly to the shadows. The earth thinned. A tremor passed beneath the floorboards. Then faint but deliberate sound of dirt shifting, like a hand digging its way upward. The next morning, the chapel doors were chained shut. The bishop had arrived, dressed not in ceremonial gold, but plain black. As if in mourning, he walked the grounds, sprinkling holy water on the grass. "Is it true," I asked, "that a song can open a grave?" He looked at me with eyes colder than fear. "Not open," he said. "Invite." Later, I found myself standing in the graveyard, beneath the twisted branches of the old yew tree. One mound Saturday there, older than the church itself. No name carved into the stone, only a deep groove, as if something inside had pressed against it for years. The wind shifted. I heard the first line again. This time, I wrote it down. The letters writhed on the page, and under the yew tree, the soil moved. Chapter 2: The First Verse in the Dark. I didn't mean to sing it out loud, but something in the dark was waiting for me to. It was past midnight when the urge became unbearable. The paper with the strange letters lay on my desk, faintly shimmering in the candlelight. I had written them 2 days ago, yet they looked fresher now, as though the ink was still bleeding into the fibers. The house was silent, except for the slow ticking of the hallway clock. I touched the page with one finger. My lips began to move before I realized it. The first syllable was bitter, the second tasted like rain-soaked soil, the third like blood. I sang the first verse. The moment the final word left my mouth, every candle went out. A cold wind rose from the floor itself, carrying the scent of wet earth and something older, something rotting. The boards beneath my bed groaned, stretching under a weight I couldn't see. Then came the sound. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, from under the floor. I wanted to move, to scream, but my body refused. Something scraped upward, nails or claws dragging against wood. It stopped suddenly, leaving a silence so dense it felt alive. In the morning, I found dirt on my bedroom floor. Not dust, dirt fresh, damp, clean together in clumps as if scooped from deep underground. I carried it to the chapel, hoping to find Father Merrick. The church was still chained shut. The bishop stood outside, speaking to 2 grave diggers. His gaze locked on me. "You've sung it," he said in a question. I stayed silent. "You didn't call something," he continued, stepping closer. "You woke it." That night, the dream returned. The skin-bound book lay open on the altar. This time, I wasn't alone. A figure knelt beside it, dressed in a tattered choir robe. Its face veiled in soil. In a voice of 100 whispers, it said, "Sing the second verse, and I will show you what's inside the grave." I woke choking on the taste of earth. Outside my window, the yew tree swayed with no wind, and from somewhere beneath it, I heard breathing. Chapter 3: The Bishop's Warning. The bishop didn't knock. He came into my house like a man stepping into his own coffin. It was barely dawn when I woke to the creak of the front door. My mother was still asleep. The air smelled faintly of incense, stale, like the kind that clings to robes left in a crypt for decades. He stood in the hallway, his black cassock heavy with dew, a silver crucifix hanging from a chain so thick It looked like it belonged on an anchor. His eyes scanned the room until they found me, and the look he gave made my skin tighten. "Where is it?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it had the weight of a verdict. I pretended not to understand. "Where's what?" "I am," he said, stepping closer. "The first verse has already been sung. You felt it, hadn't you? The soil moving." My throat tightened. I didn't answer. He sighed a sound almost like pity. Then he removed something from his pocket, a folded scrap of parchment, brittle and brown with age. He placed it on the table between us. Drawn in faded ink was the same series of curling letters I had written to nights before. "It has been sung only 6 times in the last century," the bishop said. "Each time, a grave opened, and each time, something came out that was not what was put in." I stared at the parchment. The letters seemed to shimmer, as if aware they were being looked at. "This hymn was never meant for the living," he continued. "It is a summons, a key, and the grave beneath the youth is the lock." I finally found my voice. "Then why not destroy it?" His lips pressed then. "Because a key can be destroyed, but the door remains, and one day, something will find a way to open it again. The hymn only delays the inevitable by giving it rules." I didn't like the way he said rules. Before he left, he touched my shoulder. His hand was cold, the weight of it unshakable. "If you dream of the second verse, you must not sing it, not even a single word. Do you understand?" I nodded, but I thought of the voice in my dream figure with the soil veiled face and how its promise had tasted like truth. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind. Only, it wasn't wind. It was the hymn hum from beneath the ground. Steady, patient, waiting. Chapter 4: The Grave That Shifted Overnight. I swear the grave was longer this morning than it was yesterday. The yew tree loomed at the far edge of the churchyard, its branches black against the early dawn. I had seen that mound of earth every day since I was a chilled and changed, unmoving, a relic of something the town no longer spoke about. But today, it was different. The mound seemed stretched, like the ground had been pulled from beneath, elongating the coffin inside. The stone marker had tilted forward, its deep groove now wider, as though something within had pressed harder against it in the night. I crouched beside it. My fingers brushed the dirt. It was loose, fresh. The bishop's words clawed at the back of my mind. Not open. Invite. A cold wind slithered through the grass. It carried the faintest sound like someone exhaling from deep underground. I held my breath and listened. 3 seconds. 4. Then, unmistakably, the first line of them hummed low, vibrating through the soil. I stumbled back. The sound stopped. When I turned, Father Merrick was standing just inside the graveyard gate. He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. His eyes told me he already knew I'd been there. "You've seen it," he said quietly. I nodded. "It will keep changing," he warned, stepping toward me. "A little each night, until it's ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. He didn't answer, just crossed himself, turned, and walked away. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the grave. My mind kept replaying its length, the tilt of the stone, the loosened soil. It felt less like a burial site and more like a door swelling against its frame. I dreamed again. This time, the yew tree was split in half, its roots curling like skeletal fingers into the open grave. The figure from before knelt inside the coffin, its soil-covered veil gone, revealing a mouth stitched shut with the same blackened thread from the skin-bound book. It tilted its head at me and pointed upward toward the surface. When I woke, the taste of dirt was stronger than ever. I went back to the churchyard before sunrise. The mound had shifted again. This time, the earth was cracked, a jagged line running down its center as if something inside had turned over in its sleep. And from deep below, I heard the second line of them, not hummed. Son, chapter 5, the second verse. They told me to stop, but the voice inside them told me to finish. The second verse had been clawing at the edges of my mind since the grave shifted. I heard it in the wind, in the creak of the chapel's wooden beams, even in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. It wasn't a memory anymore, it was a command. I lasted 3 days before giving in. It was past midnight when I lit a single candle in my room. The paper with the first verse lay beside me, but I didn't need it. The second verse was already burned into me, each word heavy and wet like a stone pulled from a riverbed. I began to sing. The first line left my mouth like a confession whispered in a confessional. The second made the candle gutter, spilling shadows across the walls. By the third, my breath came out in visible puffs, the air colder than winter. When I reached the final word, the candle went out. From beneath the floor, I heard a deep, resonant thud like a giant feast striking the earth from below. Then, faint at first but growing louder, came the tolling of a bell, not the cracked bell of St. Clement's. This sound was older, heavier, and it rang from under the ground. I ran to the window. The yew tree swayed violently in the still air. The grave beneath it had split wide enough to see darkness between the clumps of dirt. Something moved inside that darkness. The bishop arrived before dawn. He banged on the door until my mother opened it, her face pale with confusion. When he saw me, his expression wasn't angry, it was resigned. "You've sung the second verse," he said. I didn't deny it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so my mother couldn't hear. "Do you know what comes after the second verse?" I shook my head. "An answer," he said. "Not from God, not from anything that belongs to him." That night, the dream returned, sharper, louder. I stood at the edge of the open grave. The figure in the choir robe reached out its hand. When I took it, my palm came away wet, streaked with soil and something, warm blood. It leaned close and whispered in a language I couldn't name, but my mind translated it instantly. "Sing the third verse, and the door will open." I woke to find fresh dirt on my bedspread, and outside my window, the grave was breathing. Chapter 6. The nun who knew the third verse. She had sewn her mouth shut to keep the hymn inside. I met her in the old wing of St. Agnes Convent, a place the nuns claimed was closed for repairs but smelled of dust, candle wax, and forgotten prayers. Father Merrick had brought me there after the bishop's warning, saying only, "She knows what happens next." The room was dim, lit by a single lamp that flickered as if afraid of the shadows it created. In the far corner sat a frail woman in a gray habit, her head bowed, hands folded tight around a rosary with beads as black as coal. When she looked up, I saw the stitches. Thick black thread crisscrossed her lips, puckering the skin, sealing her mouth with a cruel permanence. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. "This is Sister Magdalena," Father Merrick said softly. She sang the hymn, all 3 verses, her eyes milky with age yet sharp locked on mine. She tapped the rosary 3 times against the table, then pointed at my throat. I didn't need her to speak to know she recognized it, the taste of dirt that never left, the echo of the grave breathing at night. Father Merrick leaned in. "She's the only one who lived. Everyone else who finished the hymn," his voice faltered, "was taken." Sister Magdalena reached for a small wooden box beside her chair. Inside was a scrap of parchment, so brittle it nearly crumbled in her hands. She slid it toward me. Written there, in the same curling, shifting letters I'd seen before, was the third verse. I couldn't read it, not yet, but I could feel it symbol, a note I somehow already knew. "She keeps it," Father Merrick said, "so no one else will sing it." She stitched her mouth shut to stop herself. "The hymn doesn't just invite the grave to open, it forces you to want to." Sister Magdalena grabbed my wrist suddenly, her grip shockingly strong. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head violently, as if begging me not to look at the page again. That night, I dreamt of her. She stood by the yew tree, her lips unstitched, blood dripping down her chin as she sang the third verse. The grave yawned open, and something vast and formless rose from within, his voice matching hers note for note. When I woke, I found the scrap of parchment from her box flying on my bedroom floor. I hadn't taken it, and in the dark, the hymn hummed back at me, waiting. Chapter 7. Midnight in the chapel. At midnight, the organ played by itself. I hadn't stepped inside St. Clement's since the bishop chained the doors. Yet that night, as the clock struck 12, I woke to the sound of the organ, deep, hollow chords rolling through the ear like a slow tide. I dressed without thinking. The streets were empty, the town asleep, but the closer I got to the chapel, the louder it became. Not just music singing, a choir of voices, layered and perfect, rising and falling with the same unholy hymn that had been haunting me for weeks. The chains on the chapel doors hung loose, broken, the metal twisted like soft wax. I pushed the door open and was met by the sharp scent of incense and something else. Earth, damp, fresh, like the graveyard had been dragged inside. The nave was empty, no choir, no congregation, but the organ keys moved on their own, pressing down in smooth, deliberate motions. The pipes groaned with the hymn's first and second verses, filling the space with a sound that made the wooden beams shudder. I turned toward the altar on Frownsy. The statues of the saints, carved in white marble, were weeping, not water, not oil. Thick black streaks ran down their faces, dripping onto the floor. When one drop landed near my feet, I saw it hiss and eat into the wood like acid. Somewhere above me, the choir loft trembled. Dust rained down. I could hear footsteps, slow and heavy, pacing the boards. "Who's there?" My voice sounded small against the crushing weight of the hymn. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the loft, a figure leaned forward into the light draped in a tattered choir robe, its head veiled in soil. It didn't speak. It only raised one hand and traced three shapes in the air: a cross, a circle, and a key. The organ fell silent. The figure disappeared. I backed toward the door, my eyes darting from statue to statue. Every single one had turned its gaze toward me. Their stone lips parted, and in one perfect voice, they whispered the third verse of the hymn. I ran, but even outside, even as I crossed the churchyard under the looming yew tree, I could still hear the marble throats sing to the grave, telling it to open. Chapter 8, the third verse is sung. The last word tasted like dirt. It happened in the dream first. I was standing beneath the yew tree, the grave yawning open at my feet. The figure in the tattered choir robe stood beside me, veil gone. Its face was pale, almost human, except for the eye shallow sockets, packed with soil. In its hands was the skin-bound book, open to the last page. I told myself I wouldn't sing, but when I looked down, my mouth was already moving. The first line spilled out like breath I'd been holding for years. The air around us thickened. The ground trembled. The second line burned my throat, each syllable heavier than the last. The yew tree's roots writhed, tearing through the soil like snakes. And then third, the final word rolled off my tongue, and the grave shuddered violently, coughing up clumps of dirt. A sound followed, deep and guttural, like the first inhale of something that had been suffocating for centuries. I woke screaming, but the taste of earth lingered. Outside my window, the graveyard was alive with movement. The yew tree shadow swayed against the moonlight, stretching unnaturally across the ground. The mound beneath it was no longer a mound, it was a hole, black and endless. I ran. I didn't remember deciding to, but my feet carried me straight to the graveyard. The air was sharp and cold, smelling of incense and decay. Something was climbing out. Two pale hands gripped the edge of the pit, fingers long, nails cracked and filthy. Slowly, impossibly slowly, a figure pulled itself into the moonlight. It wasn't the robe dreamed figure. This thing was bare, its skin the same color as the bone beneath. Its chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each exhale sending a cloud of frost into the air. When it opened its eyes, they were the same hollow sockets filled with soil. It didn't look at me, looked at the chapel, and then it began to move toward it. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned to see the bishop, holding a silver censer swinging from a chain. Smoke poured from it, thick and acrid, and with every step he took, he chanted in a voice louder than the wind. "You sent it," he said without looking at me. "Now we can only try to send it back before it finds its voice." The thing stopped, tilting its head toward the bishop, and then, from somewhere deep inside its chest, it began to sing. Chapter 9, what rose from the grave. It didn't crawl out. It floated, as if the earth was too afraid to hold it. The thing hovered inches above the broken soil. Its pale skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too sharp. Every breath it took carried the smell of freshly turned earth, mingled with something sweet like flowers left alone on a coffin. The bishop's chanting grew louder, each word a strike of defiance. But the creature tilted its head, almost curious, as though the sound amused it. Then it sang. The voice was wrong, not deep, not high, but layered hundreds of tones at once, some human, some not. It was the hymn, all three verses at once, bending the air around us. The ground beneath my feet trembled, gravestones rattling as though eager to answer the call. I stepped back, but my legs felt heavy, the air thick as molasses. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body leaned forward, drawn toward the sound. The bishop swung the censer violently, sending black smoke curling through the moonlight. "Don't listen," he shouted. "It's not singing to you, it's singing through you." The creature's eyes, those hollow sockets packed with soil, shifted toward me. The hymn faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a whisper inside my skull. "You opened the door. Now you belong on the other side." A sudden cracking noise tore through the graveyard. The yew tree's roots ripped out of the ground, writhing toward the chapel like tendrils of some buried leviathan. Statues along the church wall began to weep again, black streaks running down their faces, pooling at their feet. The bishop took a step toward the creature, lifting the censer higher. For a moment, the thing drifted back, its voice breaking into a hiss. But then it exhaled on a long, low note, and the silver chain in the bishop's hand snapped. The censer fell into the dirt with a dull thud. The hymn surged louder, pulling at the world itself. The cracked bell in the tower began to swing, tolling without wind or rope. I realized then it wasn't here to kill. It was here to gather. And somewhere beneath the hymn, beneath the rumble of the ground, I could hear other graves shifting open. Chapter 10. The church splits. Half the congregation prayed. The other half ran. "I'm mourning," the whole town had heard. Some swore they'd seen it floating above the yew tree, its voice carrying across the rooftops like a storm. Others claimed it was nothing more than a vision, a sign from God meant only for the faithful. That chapel, once locked and silent, was now a battlefield of belief. Inside, the bishop stood before the altar, his voice hoarse from hours of chanting, refusing to let the hymn take root again. Behind him, a group of devout parishioners clutched rosaries, whispering prayers, their eyes wet with awe. "It's an angel," one woman insisted, her voice breaking. "We called, and heaven answered." "It's not heaven," Father Merrick shot back, slamming his palm against the pulpit. "No angel rises from a grave." The argument swelled until it was no longer words but shouts. Those who believed it wholly demanded to let the hymn finish, to open the door fully. They spoke of blessings, of salvation. The others, those who had seen the black tears on the statues, the roots tearing through the earth, pleaded for silence, for burning the skin-bound book before it was too late. I stood in the back, my head pounding with the echo of the creature's voice. I wanted to believe one side, but the memory of its whisper, "You belong on the other side," left no room for comfort. Outside, the ground was restless, even through the chapel walls. I felt the vibrations, steady and deliberate, like a heart beating beneath the soil. Then the windows shook. A low note rolled through the air, vibrating the wooden beams overhead. People frowned. See, it wasn't coming from the creature. It was coming from the graves. Down scenes of them, the believers fell to their knees, lifting their hands as if welcoming a procession. The others bolted for the doors, pushing past me into the street. I followed, my breath sharp in my throat, but stopped short when I saw the churchyard. Every mound of earth had shifted, stones tilted, soil split, roots rose like skeletal fingers, and through it all, the hymn wove itself into the wind, gentle, coaxing, patient. Behind me, the bishop's voice broke through the chaos. If they finished singing, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because we all knew. Chapter 11. The bishop's last mass. He chanted louder than the hymn, but the grave still widened. The bishop had locked himself inside the chapel before dawn, refusing food, water, or rest. By the time I pushed the heavy doors open, the air was thick with incense and the low, relentless murmur of Latin prayers. He stood at the altar, arms raised, the silver crucifix in his hands glinting with candlelight. His voice was hoarse but steady, layering over itself in a rhythm that felt older than the chapel's walls. Every word was meant to drive the hymn out, to drown it in the way of holy liturgy. But outside, the graves were singing back. I could hear them through the stone floor, low, resonant, like the earth itself was chanting. The yew tree rattled against the windless air. Dirt shifted in slow waves around the open grave, widening it as though something far larger than a coffin lay beneath. "Why keep going?" I shouted over the noise. "It's already here." He turned, eyes burning with something between faith and fury. "Because if I stop, it won't just rise, I will speak. And when it speaks, the living will listen." The candles flickered violently. The hymn surged, pressing against the walls. Somewhere in the choir loft, the organ began to play without hands, the notes twisting into the third verse. The bishop didn't falter. He struck the altar bell again and again, the sharp clang cutting through the hymn like a blade. For a moment, it worked. The ground stilled. The organ fell silent, and then the door to the chapel blew open. Cold air swept in, carrying the smell of earth and decay. The creature stepped across the threshold without touching the ground. Its hollow, soil-packed eyes fixed on the crucifix in the bishop's hands. The bishop's voice rose to a roar, his Latin prayers cracking with desperation. The crucifix trembled in his grip, as if resisting the weight of what stood before him. The creature tilted its head, listening. Then, in perfect imitation, it began to repeat his words, flawless Latin, spoken in a voice that was both his own and countless others. The bishop's chant broke, just for a second, but that was enough. The ground beneath the altar split with a deafening crack, and from the darkness below, more voices joined the hymn. The bishop didn't stop again, but I could see it in his eyes. This was no longer a battle to win. It was his last mass. Chapter 12. The grave opens again. It wasn't the same grave. This one had my name on it. The hymn didn't stop after the bishop's voice went silent. It spread through the walls, through the ground, into every shadow of the chapel. I stumbled outside, lungs burning, only to find the churchyard transformed. The original grave beneath the yew still gaped wide, its edges raw and black. But now, another mound had risen just a few steps away. The soil was fresh, damp, and breathing. I knew before I saw it. Still, my knees buckled when I did. The headstone was plain, pale marble, no cracks, no withering, just a single name, carved with surgical precision. Mine. I reached out and touched the stone. It was warm, too warm for the night air. The moment my skin made contact, the ground trembled beneath me. A hollow knocking rose from inside, slow and deliberate. 3 knocks, the same as the first time I sang. The bishop staggered out of the chapel behind me, his cassock torn, his face pale with exhaustion. When he saw the headstone, his breath caught. "It's chosen you," he whispered. I turned to him. "Chosen me for what?" "To be buried alive," he said, voice shaking. "The hymn doesn't just call the dead, it claims the living." Before I could answer, the earth at my feet split open. A narrow crack raced across the mound, spilling damp soil onto my shoes. From within came the faintest sound, my own voices singing the first verse. I stepped back, heart pounding. The bishop grabbed my arm, but his grip was weak, trembling. "If you hear the second verse, don't answer," he warned. "No matter what it says, no matter who it sounds like." But it was too late. The voice inside, the gravelly voice, had already begun the second verse. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was in my skull, in my teeth, vibrating through my bones. Every note pulled me closer to the open crack, the earth shifting to welcome me. Somewhere behind me, the creature from the first grave watched, silent, almost patient. And in that moment, I understood him wasn't finished. Not until I was inside. Chapter 13. The hymn without a voice. Even in silence, it sang. I hadn't slept since the grave called my name. The bishop was gone, taken or fled. I didn't know when the chapel stood dark, its doors hanging open like a mouth that had already swallowed much. I thought if I stayed away from the churchyard, I could escape it. I was wrong. The hymn was with me now, not in there, not through my ears, but inside my head. A constant low hum, like the vibration of a bell long after it struck. It bled into everything. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, even the slow beat of my own heart. I covered my ears. It didn't matter. Sometimes it was just the first verse, soft and coaxing. Other times, the second verse would slip in, curling through my thoughts like smoke. But the worst was when the third verse tried to form, syllable by syllable, dragging a cold pressure through my skull. I started hearing other things too, whispers in between the notes, words that weren't part of the hymn. "Lie down, it won't hurt, you'll understand." I barricaded myself in my room, the curtains drawn, the door locked. I didn't even light a candle. Still, shadows moved across the walls, stretching toward me in time with the rhythm of the song. Another night, I woke to find the skin-bound book lying at the foot of my bed. I hadn't brought it there. Its cover twitched slightly, as if something inside was breathing. When I touched it, the humming stopped. For the first time in days, there was silence. I almost wept until I realized the silence wasn't real. The hymn was still there. It was simply waiting. I opened the book. The pages writhed with the same shifting letters I had seen before. But now they were familiar, almost friendly. The third verse stared back at me. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. It was already in my head. From outside, the yew tree groaned as its roots tore deeper into the earth. The grave that bore my name was calling again it with sound, but with the pull of gravity itself. And somewhere, far below the ground, something sang the final note, just to see if I would answer. Chapter 14, The Last Service. If I sang it one last time, I could seal the grave forever, or open them all. The chapel was almost unrecognizable. The cracked bell in the tower hummed silent, but that air hummed with a pressure that made the wooden beams groan. The pews were overturned, hymnals scattered like the aftermath of a storm. I stood in the center aisle, the skin-bound book clutched in my hands. The letters on the page no longer shifted, they stared back at me, fixed and clear, daring me to speak them aloud. Behind the altar, the yew tree's roots had broken through the stone floor, twisting upward like black veins. Through the gap in the floorboards, I could see the grave with my name on it, its mouth wide, waiting. I wasn't alone. The creature from the first grave stood in the shadows, unmoving. Its soil-packed eyes never blinked. I couldn't tell if it was guarding me or guarding them. Somewhere outside, the other graves were stirring. I could hear their voices now, hundreds of them, singing faintly like the prelude to a choir swelling into a final note. The choice was simple in theory. Sing the third verse as it was written, and the graves would open, every one of them. Sing the third verse backwards, and they would close, maybe forever. But there was a risk. The bishop's warning echoed in my mind. A key turned the wrong way, still unlocked something. My hands shook. The hymn inside me ached to be finished, to feel the completeness of its final word. I thought of Sister Magdalena, lips stitched shut. I thought of the bishop's last mass, his voice breaking as the ground split beneath him. I opened my mouth. The creature tilted its head, listening. A first syllable left my lips like a drop of blood in water. The air in the chapel thickened. Shadows pulled along the walls. The second syllable made the roots writhe violently, their tips cracking the altar steps. The final word teetered at the edge of my tongue. I could feel the pull from the grave, a hunger so strong it nearly bent me forward. My vision darkened, and in the blackness, I saw every grave in the churchyard, all of them shifting, all of them breathing. I took a breath and sang. The ground answered.
Chapter 15, Epilogue. The silence after the song. Graves don't close on their own. Someone has to sing them shut. When the final note left my lips, the world seemed to stop. No wind, no creak of the chapel's beams, not even the soft groan of the yew tree. Only a silence so absolute it felt like I had been buried alive in it. Then came the tremor. It started deep beneath my feet, spreading outward like ripples through water. The roots of the yew writhed violently, tearing themselves free from the chapel floor and snapping into the darkness below. The grave with my name on it shuddered, the soil around it collapsing inward. One by one, I heard the others follow, mounds sinking, stones toppling, the restless dead retreating into their holes. I thought it was over, but silence is deceptive. From the far corner of the chapel, the creature still stood. It hadn't moved during the song, not once. Now, as I lowered the book, it stepped forward, its soil-packed eyes fixed on me, its expression unreadable. Then it leaned close, and in a voice that was barely more than breath, it said, "You sang it the wrong way." Before I could react, it was gone, vanished into the shadows where no light could follow. Outside, the graveyard looked still. The yew tree was bare, its roots sunk deep and hidden again. But as I walked between the stones, I noticed something new, fresh mounds. Dozens of them. None had names. I didn't need to see the inside to know they were empty, waiting. By morning, the town began to forget. Those who had fled the chapel remembered only fragments, smoke, bells, wind through the graves. The bishop's name was spoken like a half-forgotten prayer. Sister Magdalena's room stood empty, her stitched lips never found. But I remembered everything. And I remembered the pull. At night, when the world is quiet, I can still feel the hymn moving through me, not in words, not in notes, but in the slow, steady beat of the earth beneath my feet. The book lies hidden, locked away where no one will stumble upon it. But I know locks are fragile. Keys can be remade. And songs are harder to kill than people. One day, someone will hum the first verse without knowing. The ground will stir. The air will thicken. And the graves will remember. When that happens, they'll need someone to sing them shut again. And this time, I'm not sure I will.